The moving boxes were already in the hallway when I noticed the recipe box was gone. 10 days. That was all it had been since I buried my wife of 46 years, and already the kitchen drawers stood open and half empty, their contents sorted into piles on the counter like evidence at a yard sale. "Dad, we kept the important stuff," Renee said, not looking up from her clipboard. "The rest is just clutter. Eleanor would understand." She did not call her mom. She never had. I walked past her to the drawer beside the stove, the one Eleanor had used for 40 years, the one that still smelled faintly of cinnamon and old tin. My hand found the space where the box should have been, the dent in the lid. The handle Eleanor wrapped in electrical tape because she refused to let me buy her a new one. "Gone." "Where's the recipe box?" I said. Not a question. A man my age learns the difference between asking and confirming. Renee's pen paused over the clipboard for exactly 1 second too long. "Probably donated." We had 3 different groups come through. Church, the shelter, that estate company you signed off on. I didn't sign off on the kitchen. "You signed off on the clean-out authorization, Dad." Page 4. Marcus came in from the garage carrying a lamp I'd bought Eleanor in 1991, wrapped now in a moving blanket like it belonged to someone else. He saw my face and set it down too carefully, the way a man sets something down when he doesn't want it to make a sound. "You okay?" he asked. I had built hardware displays for 38 years. I knew the weight of a question asked to fill silence rather than answer it. "Fine," I said. I was not fine. I was doing arithmetic. The clean-out company had been hired for furniture, for clothes, for the things too painful to keep and too heavy to throw away myself. Eleanor's recipe box was none of those things. It was the one object in this house she would have crawled across broken glass for. She had told me that herself, laughing, the year I dropped it and dented the lid trying to catch it before it hit the floor. "If this house ever catches fire, Daniel, you grab the box before you grab me. I'll already be out the door. A woman does not let a stranger from a donation truck carry that box out of her kitchen. A woman gives a box like that to someone she trusts with her whole life. I'm going to ask you both something," I said, "and I want a real answer." Renee set the clipboard down. Marcus didn't move. "Did either of you see your mother do anything unusual in the last month? Phone calls, letters, trips to the post office that didn't make sense?" "Dad, she was sick," Marcus said. "Everything she did in the last month didn't make sense. That's what dying does." It was the kind of sentence designed to close a door, not open one. I had sold hardware to enough men trying to talk their way out of a bad return to recognize the tone. "I'm going to look through the mail," I said. "The old mail, from before." "There's nothing in the mail, Dad. We went through everything for the will. Then it won't take long." I left them in the kitchen with their clipboard and their moving blankets and walked to the small desk in the den, the one Eleanor used for bills and birthday cards, and the quiet correspondence of a woman who believed every important thing in life eventually needed to be written down. I had not opened that desk since the funeral. I told myself I wasn't ready. The truth was simpler. I had been afraid of what I might find. Now I was more afraid of what I might not. In the second drawer, beneath a stack of expired coupons, I found a thin yellow receipt, the kind the post office prints when you mail something larger than a letter, insured. Signature required on delivery. The date was 5 days before she died. The recipient's name was not one I recognized, not family, not a friend whose name had ever crossed our kitchen table in 46 years of marriage. Patricia Oyulara and I sat there a long moment, the receipt thin and warm between my fingers, and felt something settle in my chest that was not quite grief and not quite suspicion. It was the feeling I used to get standing in the stockroom at closing, counting inventory that didn't match the register, knowing the numbers were trying to tell me something before I understood what. Eleanor had mailed away the one object she loved more than almost anything in this house 5 days before she died, to a woman I had never met. She had not told me. She had not asked me to hold it. She had sent it away from her own family on purpose, with insurance, sent a signature required, as if she did not trust the people closest to her to let it arrive safely. I folded the receipt once the way I folded important papers from the store for 40 years, and slid it into my shirt pocket. In the kitchen, I could hear Renee's voice again, lower now, talking to someone on the phone about square footage and a closing date. I did not go back in to correct her. Eleanor used to say that the surest way to catch a lie was to let it keep walking until it forgot where it started. I intended to let it walk. 72 hours before any of that, the house still smelled like her. I remember because I noticed it on purpose that morning, standing in the kitchen doorway with my coffee going cold in my hand. The way you notice a song is still playing only after it's nearly over. Lavender soap. The cedar drawer liners she'd replaced every spring for as long as I could remember. Something underneath it all that was just Eleanor, that I couldn't have named in 100 years of trying and would have given anything to bottle. She had been gone 11 days by then. The funeral was behind us. The casseroles from the church had stopped arriving. The house had gone quiet in the particular way. A house goes quiet when the person who used to fill its silences is no longer there to do it. I'd run Whitlock Hardware on Main Street for 38 years before I sold my share to a younger partner, and kept just enough involvement to feel useful. Eleanor used to say I knew the price of every bolt in 3 counties and the value of almost nothing else, which was her way of telling me I'd married well above what I deserved. She wasn't wrong. We raised 2 children in this house, though only one of them still spoke to me with any regularity. Our daughter, Karen, lived in Seattle with a career and a family of her own, and called on Sundays out of love rather than obligation, which Eleanor and I had always counted as a small miracle. Marcus stayed close, took over more of the bookkeeping side of the store in his 30s when my eyes started giving me trouble with the fine print. I'd been grateful for that once, proud of it even. Sunday dinners had been Eleanor's church. Pot roast, 5 o'clock sharp, and before anyone touched a fork, she'd pull a card from that old tin box and read it aloud every time, even after 40 years of making the same 6 recipes 100 times over. 2 cups flour, ½ teaspoon salt. Measure twice. Write it down. People forget what they don't write down. The kids used to roll their eyes. I used to think it was just a habit she liked, a small ceremony to mark the start of the meal. I didn't know yet how literally she meant it. Marcus had started missing more Sundays in the last 2 years than he had in the previous 20. Store's busy, he'd say. Inventory audit. A supplier problem. Eleanor never pushed him on it the way I expected her to. She'd just nod, write something on a card, and put it back in the box. I thought, at the time, that she was being patient with a grown son who had his own life now. I did not think she was keeping records. Renee had married into the family 8 years earlier, and I'd liked her well enough, at first sharp, organized, the kind of woman who color-coded her calendar and never missed a deadline. It was Eleanor who first mentioned, quietly, one Sunday while drying dishes, that Renee seemed to worry about money in a way that didn't match what Marcus brought home. "She watches the register at dinner," Eleanor said. "Did you notice that? She watches what things cost. I told her she was imagining things." Eleanor gave me the look she gave me when I was about to be wrong about something important, and let it go 3 days before the funeral clean-out. Before I knew about any postal receipt or any missing tin box, Marcus came by the house alone, which itself was unusual enough that I noted it. He sat at the kitchen table where his mother used to sit and asked me, carefully, like a man stepping onto ice he wasn't sure would hold him, whether I'd thought about what I wanted to do with the house. "I want to live in it," I said, "same as I have for 41 years. It's a lot of house for one person, Dad. It was a lot of house for 2 people also, and your mother managed." He smiled at that, the way you smile when you're trying to look like the conversation is lighter than it is. "I just think you should have options. That's all. Renee found some places, really nice ones, not like a home or anything, more like a community. I know what a senior living brochure looks like, Marcus. I sold the shelving they put their brochures on." He laughed, and for a moment he looked like the boy who used to help me stock the paint aisle on Saturday mornings, asking too many questions about how the tinting machine worked. Then the moment passed, and he looked like a tired man twice that boy's age, carrying something he wasn't telling me. "You doing all right at the store?" I asked, money-wise. "We're fine, Dad." It was the same sentence he'd say to me 3 days later in the kitchen, standing over moving blankets. Everything she did in the last month didn't make sense. That's what dying does, the same door, closing the same way. I didn't know, that evening at the kitchen table, that my wife had spent the better part of 2 years writing something down on the back of recipe cards. I didn't know she'd mailed away the one object in this house that mattered more to her than almost anything. Addressed to a stranger, insured, signature required. I only knew that my son had come to ask about the house before his mother had been gone 2 weeks, and that some small, stubborn part of me, the part that had spent 4 decades reconciling registers that didn't balance, had quietly begun keeping its own count. Eleanor used to say a man finds out who his family really is in the 6 months after a funeral, not the 6 days before one. I was about to find out she'd been right. The doorbell rang at 11 in the morning, 2 days after I found the postal receipt, and I opened it to a woman in a blazer holding a folder and a tape measure. "Mr. Whitlock? I'm Carol, with Hartwell Realty. Renee scheduled a walkthrough for the listing photos. I hope this isn't a bad time." I stood in my own doorway and felt the particular kind of cold that has nothing to do with the weather. "There's no listing," I said. Carol's smile faltered in the way smiles do when a salesperson realizes the paperwork and the homeowner are not telling her the same story. "I'm sorry, I must have the wrong information. Renee Whitlock confirmed the appointment yesterday. I have the address right here." She turned the folder toward me. "My address, my house. A listing sheet with photographs of someone else's idea of my kitchen, my den, my bedroom, staged in language that made 41 years of my life sound like square footage and updated fixtures." "I think you should go," I said, not unkindly. "And I think you should tell Renee the appointment's been canceled." Carol left without argument, the way people leave when they sense they've stepped into a family matter they want no part of. I closed the door and stood in the front hall a long moment, my hand still on the knob, listening to my own heartbeat the way I used to listen to the cash register at closing time, counting, recounting, certain the number was wrong and certain I hadn't yet found where. I did not call Renee. I did not call Marcus. I went instead to the den, to Eleanor's desk, and I sat in her chair, which still held the shape of her better than mine ever could, and I made a decision Eleanor herself would have understood completely. I would not announce that I knew. I would watch. 2 days later, I had my answer about how far the watching would need to go. Marcus called that evening, his voice doing the careful thing it had been doing for weeks now, smooth around the edges, in a way that used to mean he was about to ask me for something when he was 19. "Hey, Dad, listen, I know this might feel fast, but Renee and I have been talking, and we really think it'd be good for you to start looking at some transition options. Not pushing, just starting the conversation. Somebody already started it for you," I said. A woman named Carol came by with a tape measure. The silence on the other end of the line lasted exactly as long as it takes a man to realize he's been caught in something he hadn't yet decided how to explain. "That was a mistake," he said finally. "Renee was just exploring options, getting information. Nothing's been listed, Dad, I promise you that. The listing sheet had photographs of my kitchen. Renee took some pictures last week when she was helping clean. For memory's sake, I think Carol must have misunderstood what they were for." It was, I thought, almost a good lie. Almost good enough that a tired, grieving man might let it walk right past him without looking too closely at its feet. I had spent 38 years learning to look at the feet of a lie. "Marcus," I said, "I'm not angry. I want you to hear that. I'm not angry, and I'm not going to fight you about it tonight. But I want you to know that I know the difference between memory pictures and listing photographs, and I'd ask you not to explain it to me again like I don't." He was quiet for a moment. "Okay, Dad." "Okay," I said, and we hung up without either of us saying anything closer to the truth than that. I did not sleep well that night. I lay in the bed Eleanor and I had shared for over 4 decades and stared at the ceiling and thought about the recipe box, and the receipt in my shirt pocket, and the woman named Patricia Oyalaran I had never met, who my wife had trusted enough to mail away the most precious thing she owned. I thought, too, about something small that had happened at the funeral, something I hadn't given proper weight to until that night in the dark. An older woman I didn't recognize had stood near the back of the church the whole service, dressed plainly, and had left before the reception without speaking to anyone. I'd noticed her only because Eleanor's friends were almost all women I'd known for decades, faces worn soft and familiar by 40 years of holiday parties and hospital waiting rooms, and this woman's face had belonged to none of those memories. I had not thought to ask anyone who she was. I wondered, lying there in the dark, whether a postal worker delivers more than mail over 11 years on the same route. Whether she learns the names of dogs, the schedules of children, which houses leave porch lights on and which ones never do. Whether somewhere along the way she might learn enough about a woman's Sunday dinners and her dented tin box to become someone that woman trusted with everything. I did not know yet if I was right. But for the first time since the funeral, I found something underneath the grief that felt almost like purpose, and I let myself hold on to it instead of letting it go. I found the card on a Tuesday. In the bottom of a drawer the clean-out crew hadn't bothered to empty because it held nothing but a tangle of twist ties and a broken meat thermometer. It had slipped behind the drawer's back panel, wedged in the gap where the wood had warped years ago, and I'd never gotten around to fixing it. A single recipe card, the edges soft with age, Eleanor's handwriting unmistakable, even faded, Sunday pot roast, the same recipe she'd read aloud 1,000 times. But the margin was wrong. Beneath the ingredients, in the white space where Eleanor sometimes wrote a note about doubling a recipe for company, there was a date, March 14, and beside it, a number for $200. No explanation. No context. Just a date and a dollar figure, written in the same careful hand she used for flour and salt, as though it belonged there as naturally as anything else on the card. I sat at the kitchen table with that card for a long time. March 14 meant nothing to me on its own. I went to the den, to the drawer where I kept old bank statements, out of habit more than need, and worked backward through the months until I found it. March 14 last year. A withdrawal from our joint savings account. For $200. I remembered seeing it on the statement at the time and assuming it was something Eleanor had handled, a payment to the roofer, maybe, or money sent to Karen for the grandchildren. We had never been the kind of marriage that questioned each other's spending. 46 years builds a particular kind of trust, the kind that doesn't ask for receipts. I wondered now if that trust had been exactly what someone was counting on. I called the bank the next morning and asked, as politely as a confused old man could manage, whether they kept records of who authorized withdrawals on joint accounts going back that far. The woman on the phone was kind but firm. That kind of detailed transaction history would require a formal request, possibly an in-person visit, possibly even a fraud inquiry if I believed something was wrong. If I believed something was wrong. I did not yet know what I believed. I knew only that my wife, in the last 2 years of her life, had begun writing dates and dollar amounts into the margins of recipe cards, the way other people write things they're afraid to say out loud. I thought of Marcus's face in the kitchen doorway 11 days after the funeral, setting down a lamp too carefully. I thought of, "We're fine, Dad," said in exactly the tone a man uses when he is not. I did not call Marcus. I did not confront Renee. I had decided in Eleanor's chair at her desk that I would watch before I would speak, and I held to that decision even as my hands wanted to shake holding that small yellow card. Instead, I called Karen in Seattle. "Dad," she said, the warmth in her voice the same warmth it had always carried, untouched by whatever had grown crooked in her brother. "How are you holding up?" "I'm managing," I said, which was true in the way most things I told my children that month were true technically, narrowly, without the whole shape of it. "Can I ask you something? Did your mother ever mention being worried about money? In the last year or two?" Karen was quiet for a moment. "Not directly, but she asked me once, out of nowhere, whether I thought Marcus was doing okay. Like really okay. I told her I figured he was. The store seemed fine whenever I asked. She just said, "Sometimes people don't tell you when they're drowning. They just ask you to throw them things one at a time, so you don't notice the water." I held the phone against my ear and said nothing, because I did not trust my voice just then. "Dad, you still there?" "I'm here," I said. "I'm just thinking about your mother. She loved you, Dad. Whatever's going on, I don't know what it is, but I know she loved you, and I know she wasn't the kind of person to let something hurt you if she could help it." I thanked her, told her I'd call again soon, and sat in the quiet kitchen after we hung up with the recipe card still in my hand. Eleanor had not told me she suspected our son of something. She had not confronted him, had not confronted Renee, had not asked me to help her carry whatever weight she'd been carrying alone in the last 2 years of her life. She had written a date and a number on the back of a pot roast recipe and tucked it into a drawer, the way a woman writes something down when she isn't ready for anyone else to read it yet, but isn't willing to let it disappear either. I did not know the full shape of what she'd been protecting me from. I knew only that the shape was larger than one withdrawal slip, larger than one card, and that somewhere out there, a woman named Patricia Oyalaran was holding a tin box that might tell me the rest. I went to the den that night and looked up the name in the phone book. The old paper kind Eleanor had insisted on keeping even after everyone else switched to their phones for everything. There was only one Oyalaran listed in the county. I wrote the address down on the back of an envelope, the way Eleanor would have, and told myself I would go see her by the end of the week. I did not yet know that I would not need to wait that long. Patricia Oyalaran's porch light was on when I pulled up, though it was barely past 2 in the afternoon, and I understood before I'd even reached her steps that she'd been expecting me, or someone like me, for longer than I'd known to expect her. She was the woman from the back of the church. I recognized her plain navy dress, the careful stillness of someone who'd learned long ago how to occupy a room without drawing attention to herself. Up close, she was perhaps 65, with steady eyes and the unhurried manner of a woman who had spent 30 years on a mail route, learning that most things worth knowing reveal themselves slowly. "Mr. Whitlock," she said before I'd introduced myself, "I wondered how long it would take you. You knew I'd come. Eleanor told me you would." Eventually she held the door open. "Took you longer than she guessed, if I'm honest. She gave you 3 weeks. It's been 5. The inside of her house was modest and warm, smelling faintly of wood smoke and the particular dust of a place that had been lived in fully rather than merely maintained. On her kitchen table, waiting as though she'd set it out that morning in anticipation, sat Eleanor's tin recipe box, the dent in the lid catching the afternoon light. Something in my chest came loose at the sight of it, some knot I hadn't realized I'd been carrying since the clean-out. "How did you know my wife?" I asked, sitting where she gestured. "I delivered mail on this route for 31 years before I retired. Eleanor's was one of my last stops most mornings. We started talking, must be 11 years ago now. Tuesdays mostly. She'd have coffee waiting if it was cold out. We talked about gardens, mostly grandchildren. The kind of talk that doesn't seem like much until you realize you've been doing it for over a decade, and the person knows you better than people who've known you 3 times as long. She never mentioned you. I expect she had her reasons." Patricia folded her hands on the table. "About 2 years ago, she started talking less about gardens, started asking me things instead, whether I thought people could hide money from family, whether a bank would believe an old woman over her own son if it came to it. I didn't understand at first. I don't think she fully understood herself, not yet. She was just beginning to see the shape of something she didn't want to see." "What did she see, Patricia?" She studied me for a long moment. The way you study someone, you're deciding whether to trust with the last weight of a promise. Then she reached into the recipe box and drew out a stack of cards, perhaps 15 of them, bound together with a faded ribbon. She started writing it down, Patricia said, in the margins, dates, amounts. She told me once, "If I confront him directly and I'm wrong, I'll have broken something I can't fix. If I write it down and I'm right, someday someone will need the proof, and it won't be my voice accusing him. It'll just be the truth, sitting there, waiting." I took the cards from her with hands that had gone unsteady. Pot roast, apple pie, her mother's cornbread. Beneath each recipe, in the white space she'd always used for small kitchen notes, were dates and dollar figures, 11 of them in total, spanning nearly 2 years. I recognized 3 of the dates immediately from the bank statements I'd pulled. The rest I would need to verify, but I no longer doubted what I'd find. The amounts totaled just under $31,000. She told me what she thought it was for, Patricia said quietly. "The store. Marcus had taken on debt. He never told either of you about a bad supplier contract, an expansion that didn't pan out. She found out by accident, going through old mail that had been misdelivered to your house instead of the store. She never told you because she didn't want your last year together poisoned by it. She told me she'd rather carry it alone than watch you carry it with her while she was dying." I sat with that for a long moment, the cards trembling slightly in my hands, not from anger but from something closer to awe, the particular awe of discovering, after 46 years, that the person you loved most had still found one more way to protect you that you'd never seen coming. Why did she send it to you instead of leaving it for me? because she knew what would happen the moment she was gone. Patricia's voice was steady, but her eyes had gone wet. She told me, plain as anything, sitting right where you're sitting now. They'll move fast, Patricia. Grief makes people move fast, some toward each other and some toward what they can still get before it's too late. If I leave the box in the house, it disappears in the cleanout, and Daniel never knows what I knew. If I leave it with him directly, he'll either confront Marcus too soon, out of love, before there's enough proof to matter, or he'll never ask the question at all because he won't want to believe it. I need someone to hold it until he's ready to ask the right question himself. What was the right question? Patricia almost smiled. She said you'd ask where the box went. Not who took the money, not what Marcus had done. She knew you, Mr. Whitlock. She knew you'd notice the box was missing before you noticed anything else, because that box was the one thing in that house that was never about money. And she was right, wasn't she? I thought of standing in that kitchen 10 days after the funeral, my hand finding empty space in the drawer, the certainty settling into my chest before I had words for it. She was right, I said. Patricia reached into the box one more time and drew out a sealed envelope, my name written across the front in Eleanor's hand, the letters slightly less steady than I remembered, written by a hand that had already begun running out of time. She asked me to give you this only after you'd seen the cards, Patricia said. Not before. She was very particular about that. She said you needed to understand the facts on your own first, so the letter wouldn't feel like instructions. It would feel like her. I held the envelope for a long moment without opening it. There's one more thing, Patricia said. Something she did about 4 months before she died that I don't think even she expected to need. She went to the bank herself, alone, while you were at a doctor's appointment, and filed a written concern with their fraud department. Quietly, just in case. She told me she hoped she'd never need it filed at all. But she said a woman doesn't write something like that down and then trust the world to do right by it on its own. I sat in Patricia Oyalaran's warm kitchen, 11 recipe cards and a sealed letter in my hands, and understood for the first time the full weight of what Eleanor had carried alone in the last 2 years of her life. And the full weight of what she had still, somehow, found a way to set down gently into mine. I did not open the letter yet. Some things I had learned from her were meant to be read only when a man was ready to act on what they asked of him. I was not ready yet, but for the first time since the funeral, I understood exactly what I would need to do and exactly how patient I would have to be to do it right. Renee called it a family meeting, which should have told me everything I needed to know about how little she understood what that phrase had once meant in this house. She and Marcus arrived together on a Saturday afternoon, 2 weeks after my visit to Patricia's kitchen, carrying a folder thick with paperwork, and the particular brightness people put on when they've rehearsed something they're hoping will go smoothly if delivered with enough enthusiasm. "We found the most amazing place, Dad," Renee said, spreading brochures across the kitchen table, the same table where Eleanor had once read recipe cards aloud every Sunday at 5. "Maple Crest? It's not a nursing home, it's a community, independent living, but if you ever need more support, they have that too, right on site. No moving twice. You'd love the dining room." I let her talk. I had spent 2 weeks doing exactly what Eleanor had asked of me, without knowing it, visiting the bank with Patricia's encouragement, sitting across from a fraud officer named Adrian Cole, who listened to my account with the careful patience of someone who had seen this story before, and knew how it usually ended, and meeting twice with an estate attorney named Walter Briggs, an old acquaintance from my Rotary days, who had looked over Eleanor's recipe cards and her sealed bank complaint with an expression that grew more serious by the minute. None of it showed on my face that Saturday. I had learned over 4 decades of running a register how to keep my face still while the numbers underneath it moved. "It looks like a nice place," I said, turning a brochure over in my hands. Renee's shoulders dropped with visible relief. "I knew you'd see it that way once you actually looked. We're not trying to push you out, Dad. We just want you somewhere safe. Somewhere you don't have to manage a whole house alone." "I appreciate that," I said, and watched something in Marcus's posture ease as well. The tension he'd been carrying in his shoulders for weeks finally loosening, because he believed in that moment that his father had stopped looking too closely. There's actually a unit opening up next month, Renee continued, sliding another paper toward me. If we move quickly, we could lock in the rate before it goes up in the new year, and it would line up well with closing on the house. We found a buyer, actually, a young family. They love the place. They're pre-qualified and everything. You found a buyer, I repeated. We didn't want to bother you with all the details while you were grieving, Marcus said quickly. Renee's handled most of it. It's a good offer, Dad. Above asking, even. I looked at my son's face and thought of him at 19, climbing the ladder in the paint aisle to dust the top shelves I could no longer reach, asking me questions about why certain colors cost more than others, genuinely curious about the world in a way that had nothing to do with what it could give him. I thought of the man across from me now, smiling carefully, believing he had nearly finished something. I'll think about it, I said. Give me a week. Of course, Renee said. Take all the time you need. She said it the way people say things they don't mean when they believe the outcome is already decided. They left an hour later, the brochures still spread across the table, and I sat alone in the quiet kitchen and allowed myself, finally, to open the letter Patricia had given me. Daniel, if you're reading this, you found Patricia, and you found the cards, and I imagine you're sitting somewhere quiet, trying to decide what kind of man you want to be, now that you know. I want you to understand something first, before anything else. I did not keep this from you because I didn't trust you. I kept it from you because I knew exactly what you would do if I told you. While I was still strong enough to watch you do it, you would have confronted Marcus immediately, out of love, out of anger, out of 40 years of being the kind of father who fixes what's broken the moment he sees the crack. And I needed more than anger to fix this. I needed proof, and proof takes time. And I didn't have time left to spend watching you grieve two losses at once, me and the son you thought you knew. Marcus is not a monster, Daniel. He's a frightened man who made one bad decision and then made 12 more trying to outrun the first one. I don't say that to excuse him. I say it because I know you, and I know that whatever you decide to do with what you've learned, you'll do it better if you remember that the boy who used to fall asleep in the truck on deliveries with you is still in there somewhere, buried under all this fear. I went to the bank because I needed someone outside this family to know the truth in case I never found the right moment to tell you myself. I am not asking you for revenge. I am asking you to make sure the people who depend on that store, and there are more of them than just us, Daniel. There are families who count on Marcus's paychecks too, don't lose everything because one man was too afraid to ask for help. Measure twice, write it down. You taught me that lesson works for more than just recipes. All those years you kept your ledger straight at the store. I'm trusting you to use it now. I love you. I have loved you since the day you fixed that ridiculous lawnmower I never should have bought, and I will love you in whatever way the dead are allowed to love the living, for as long as that turns out to be. Eleanor. I sat at that table for a long time after I finished reading, the brochures for Maple Crest still scattered in front of me, the recipe box close enough to touch. Renee believed she had nearly won. Marcus believed his father had stopped looking. They did not know that Walter Briggs had already filed the documents. Eleanor's letter asked of me not to destroy the store, but to restructure its ownership in a way that would protect the employees and the future, regardless of what came next for Marcus personally. They did not know that Adrian Cole's fraud review had a date already set, dressed up by Renee herself as nothing more than a routine formality to clear up paperwork before the house could close. They did not know that the box was no longer the only thing waiting quietly in this house for the right moment to be seen. I picked up the Maple Crest brochure, folded it once, and set it gently on top of the others. I would give them their week, and then I would let the truth do what Eleanor had always trusted it to do, given enough patience and enough time. The fraud review meeting was scheduled for 10 in the morning at the Heritage Trustip branch on Main Street, the same bank where Eleanor and I had opened our first joint account 44 years earlier, with $60 and more hope than sense. Renee had arranged it herself, calling it paperwork cleanup when she told Marcus, and a formality before closing when she told me. I let her believe that was exactly what it was. I arrived 10 minutes early, as I always had for everything in my life that mattered, and found Walter Briggs already waiting in the small conference room near the back. His briefcase open, Eleanor's recipe cards arranged inside a clear folder beside her sealed bank complaint. "You don't have to say much in there," Walter reminded me, the way he had every day that week. "Let Adrian run the meeting. Let the documents do the talking." "I know. You sure you're ready for this?" I thought of Eleanor's letter, of the boy falling asleep in the truck on deliveries, of $31,000 written in the careful margins of recipes she'd read aloud every Sunday for 40 years without once raising her voice. "I've been ready for 2 weeks," I said. "I was just waiting for the right room." Marcus and Renee arrived together at 10:05, Renee carrying her folder of closing documents, already talking before she'd fully sat down. "I brought the paperwork for the house. I figured, since we're already meeting, we could knock both things out at once, save everyone a trip." She stopped when she saw Adrian Cole enter behind them, followed by a second bank officer carrying a thin file folder of her own. "Mr. Whitlock, Mrs. Whitlock," Adrian said, settling into her chair with the unhurried calm of a woman who had done this many times before and felt no need to rush toward what was coming. "Thank you both for coming in. I understand this was framed to you as a routine account review." "Isn't it?" Renee asked, her eyes flicking toward me, then toward Walter's briefcase, reading the room the way a woman reads a room when she senses, for the first time, that she might not control everything in it. "We've had an open inquiry on the Whitlock joint savings account for several months," Adrian said, "initiated by Eleanor Whitlock herself this past spring, regarding a pattern of withdrawals she believed were unauthorized." The silence that followed had a texture to it. I watched Marcus's face very carefully, the way I used to watch a customer's face when they realized the discount they'd been counting on didn't apply to what was in their cart. The color did not leave him all at once. It left in stages: first his eyes, then his jaw, then whatever had been holding his shoulders square for the last 6 weeks. That can't be right," he said. "Mom never said anything about she wouldn't have," I said quietly. It was the first thing I'd said since sitting down, and every eye in the room turned toward me. She wasn't the kind of woman who accused someone before she had proof. She just started keeping records instead. Walter slid the clear folder across the table. 11 recipe cards, each one bearing a date and a dollar amount in Eleanor's careful hand, alongside photocopies of the corresponding bank statements Walter had pulled with Adrian's office over the past 2 weeks. Renee reached for the folder first, flipping through it with quickening, uneven motions, and I watched understanding arrive on her face like weather, moving in not all at once, but in a front that couldn't be stopped once it started. "Marcus," she said very quietly, "what is this?" "I can explain. What is this?" Adrian opened her own folder. "We also have a written statement filed by Eleanor Whitlock in March of last year, detailing her concerns and requesting the account be monitored. I'd like to read a portion of it into the record, with Mr. Whitlock's permission." I nodded. Adrian's voice was even and unhurried as she read, but Eleanor's words filled that small conference room the way they used to fill our kitchen on a Sunday evening. "I do not write this to destroy my son. I write it because a woman has the right to protect what she has spent a lifetime building, even from the people she loves most. If something happens to me before I find the courage to speak to him directly, I trust this bank to hold what I could not yet say out loud." Marcus put his face in his hands. Renee did not. She stared at the folder, then at me, something calculating moving behind her eyes even now, even in the wreckage of the moment. "This doesn't have anything to do with the house. The house sale can still go through. Whatever happened with the store accounts is separate from—" "The house isn't selling," I said. It was the first time I had raised my voice above a quiet, even register since walking into that room, though I had not, in fact, raised it much at all. Eleanor had taught me over 46 years that the truth rarely needs volume. It only needs the room to finally go quiet enough to hear it. "Mr. Briggs has filed paperwork this week placing the house in a trust," I continued. "The same trust your mother set up provisions for in the will neither of you read closely enough to notice. I'm not selling it. I'm not moving to Maple Crest. And the store—" I looked at Marcus, who still had not lifted his face from his hands. "The store is being restructured, effective this month, to protect the employees who depend on it. You'll keep a role, Marcus, not the one you have now. A different one, with oversight, until the debt is repaid and trust is rebuilt, if it can be rebuilt at all. That part is up to you." "Dad, I'm not finished." He went still. "Your mother spent the last 2 years of her life carrying this alone, so it wouldn't poison the time we had left together. She wrote it down on recipe cards instead of saying it out loud because she was trying to protect both of us, you from my anger, and me from grief I'd have to carry on top of grief I was already carrying. I am angry, Marcus. I want you to hear that clearly. But I am not going to let that anger finish what your fear started. Your mother didn't ask me for revenge. She asked me to make sure the people who depend on that store don't lose everything because you were too afraid to ask for help." Renee had gone very quiet, the folder of closing documents still in her hands, no longer moving toward anyone. "The fraud investigation will continue," Adrian said gently, into the silence that followed. "Given the family circumstances and the voluntary restructuring already underway, the bank's position is that this can likely be resolved through restitution and oversight rather than criminal referral, provided full cooperation going forward. That decision isn't entirely in my hands, but it's the direction I'll be recommending." Marcus finally lifted his face. His eyes were red, his composure gone entirely, and for the first time in weeks, he looked less like a man defending a lie and more like the boy who used to fall asleep in the truck on deliveries, exhausted by the weight of something he'd carried alone for far too long. "She knew," he said quietly, "the whole time, and she never said anything. She said everything, I told him. She just said it in a language she trusted you'd eventually learn to read. The house did not sell. Maple Crest kept its unit and found another tenant. The buyer Renee had found, a young family with 2 small children, ended up purchasing a place 2 streets over instead, and I saw them sometimes at the grocery store and felt nothing but a quiet relief that has never once asked to be examined too closely. The restructuring at the store took the better part of 4 months to complete. Walter handled most of it, with Adrian's office monitoring the restitution schedule. Marcus agreed to, without argument, the first decision I'd seen him make in over a year that wasn't built on fear. He kept his job, though not his title. A man named Desmond Cruz, who had worked the floor at Whitlock Hardware for 19 years and never once been late on an order or short on a register, was brought in to oversee the books. And Marcus reported to him the way I once reported to no one, which I understood was its own kind of medicine, hard to swallow and necessary all the same. I did not press criminal charges. I want to be honest about how close I came. There were nights that spring when I sat alone at the kitchen table, with the recipe cards spread in front of me, and felt something colder than grief move through me, something that wanted very badly to make my son understand, in the most permanent way the law allowed, exactly what he had done to his mother's last 2 years on this earth. But Eleanor had not asked me for that. She had asked me to protect the people who depended on that store, and to remember the boy who fell asleep in the truck. I have tried every day since to be the kind of man who could hold both the anger and the mercy at once, without either one canceling out the other. I am not certain I have always succeeded. I am certain I have tried. Renee left him in the autumn. I won't pretend that surprised me, and I won't pretend it didn't carry its own quiet sorrow, because whatever she had become in the rush toward that house and that sale, she had once been a sharp, capable young woman who genuinely seemed to love my son before fear and money found the cracks in both of them and went to work. She moved 2 states away. Marcus sees his children every other weekend and has, by every account I trust, become more present for those visits than he managed to be for almost anything in the 2 years before his mother died. Karen flew in from Seattle the week everything came apart and stayed longer than she'd planned, and the 2 of us spent an evening at the kitchen table going through the recipe cards together, reading them aloud the way her mother used to, ingredients and amounts, the small private ledger hidden inside each one, no longer a secret kept from anyone. She really did write everything down, Karen said, turning the pot roast card over in her hands, tracing the dent in the tin box beside it with one finger. She always said people forget what they don't write down, I told her. I don't think she meant just recipes. I drove out to see Patricia Oyaleran most Tuesdays now, the way Eleanor once did, and I have come to understand slowly why my wife valued those mornings so much. There is a particular kind of friendship that asks nothing of you except your honesty, and Patricia has never once asked me for anything more than that. We talk about gardens, about her grandchildren who visit on weekends. Sometimes, less often than I'd like to admit, about Eleanor and the 11 years of Tuesday mornings I never knew I owed her thanks for. The tin recipe box sits back in its drawer now, the dent in the lid catching the morning light the same way it always has, the electrical tape on the handle exactly where Eleanor left it. I have not moved it. I do not intend to. Some Sundays, when Karen calls or Marcus brings the grandchildren by, I still pull a card from that box before dinner the way Eleanor did for 40 years, and read it aloud at the table, ingredients and amounts, the children rolling their eyes the same way their parents once did. They do not know yet what those margins once held. I am not certain they ever need to. Some things, once they have done their work, are allowed to go back to simply being recipes. What I learned in the end was not that my wife had kept a secret from me. It was that she had spent the last 2 years of her life finding the quietest, gentlest way possible to protect everyone she loved at once, her husband from heartbreak, her son from a destruction he could not have survived, the employees of a small store on Main Street from losing everything because one man was too afraid to ask for help. She did not leave me a fortune. She left me a method. Measure twice. Write it down. Trust the truth to do its work in its own time, and trust the people who love you to be patient enough to let it. I think, most days, that I finally understand what she was trying to teach me. All those Sundays at 5 o'clock sharp, reading recipes aloud to a family that had no idea they were also being taught how to survive each other. I think, most days, that I have finally learned to write it down too.